session, and we'll share it with those of you who signed up through Eventbrite. Also host it on achievethecore.org if you want to access it in the future. So just a few words about tonight, our time together. My name is Carrie, and I'm a designer at Student Achievement Partners, and we host these monthly opportunities, these coffee and conversations, to get a chance to hear from folks who are doing really important, interesting work that we're learning through or about at Student Achievement Partners. So really excited about tonight. Wanted to make sure that you all got to see our norms for engaging respectfully with one another. So we'd love you to use the chat throughout, sharing constructive ideas, resources, and comments. If that is distracting to you, just minimize the chat so you don't have to have that across your screen, and you can just engage through watching the presenter. And as noted on the event page, we're recording the presentation. We will have the chance to have a Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have questions, there'll be a mechanism for being able to share those at the very end of the evening. And also, just so you know, there's a chance this is true conversation. So we'll be having conversation, Maribel and myself, and also you'll all get a chance to go to breakout rooms and talk to one another. If you're in a place where you can be on camera and off mute once that happens, it's great. Folks understand if you are multitasking from your classrooms or your homes this afternoon and evening, but in the breakout rooms, that's a chance to get to connect with educators who are all interested in this learning together. If there are any instances of cyberbullying or disruptive kind of attempts to have any kind of challenging behavior, you will be removed. It's probably a non-issue. We have great sessions here in this format. And if you are a social media tweeter or Instagrammer, please feel free to engage in the conversation on social media. Our Twitter information is on the left-hand screen of the screen, and we have a brand new Instagram channel, actually. So we're just getting started there at Achieve the Core SAP. And I am so excited that our guest also does some amazing work on Instagram. That's actually how we first found her, at the handle Decolonize Literacy. So please feel free to engage in that way tonight. We are really, really thrilled to have Maribel here with us today. She is educator, a former 6th through 8th grade language arts teacher and world cultures teacher, and a STEM integration transformation coach for the Technology Access Foundation. And she works to create transformative systems of learning for students and teachers of color to eliminate race-based disparities by partnering with teachers to cultivate project-based learning environment at TAF at Washington Middle School in Seattle Public Schools. So we are just thrilled to have Maribel here to talk about decolonizing instruction. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Maribel, to introduce yourself further.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to share the framework that I've authored. I am a practitioner. I am not a scholar, but I've definitely learned so much, and I'm so appreciative of everyone who does the research and the work to make this accessible to K-12 educators. I would like to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. I would also like to honor the waters of the Puget Sound and Lake Washington, known as Hachu, and also our sacred Mother Mountain on the Pacific Northwest, Tahoma. And so I identify as an Indigenous Chicana. I'm a daughter of Mexican immigrants. I'm the mother of two Coeltecan Huichol children, Atzlanesi and Temixcali. And so my identities of being an educator, a mother, are very much, they inform each other. So I try not to compartmentalize my identities. And my children are being raised to value and connect to our mother, the land, through consistent ceremonial practice. As Carrie mentioned, I'm a STEM integration transformation coach for a nonprofit called Technology Access Foundation that works to transform schools by eliminating academic barriers for Black and Brown youth. And so what I do as a transformation coach is I collaborate and partner with 6th and 7th grade teachers in all content areas to design and launch multidisciplinary project cycles that are grounded in racial equity, activism, and STEM. So you'll see when I introduce the framework that project-based learning is very much informs the work that we're doing to decolonize instruction. Project-based learning actually stems from Indigenous ways of learning and being. I'm a former humanities classroom teacher, and also I was the program coordinator for the Education Amplifier program. So I've worked with social change movements to develop lesson plans and teaching tools that teachers can utilize to have dialogue about issues that impact our students or they're witness to. So the intersection of art, justice, and education is really important to me. So as I've mentioned, I'm just really about integration, decompartmentalizing education, and finding ways to solve problems using not only a multidisciplinary approach, but to use education as a vehicle for deep radical social change through decolonizing. I'm also an author and member of the Anti-Racist Arts Education Task Force in the Visual and Performing Arts Department for Seattle Public Schools. And I'm saying all of this, not, not just be like, oh, like I'm doing all of these things, but also that I'm very much part of the community, right? And the work that I'm doing in partnership with and in collaboration with very much has informed this framework. And so the work that I'm doing is not in isolation by any stretch of the imagination. This is work that has been started and designed, decades, generations before me. And I really am grateful for this platform, for being able to share this and make this accessible to teachers and beyond.
Thank you so much. I'm hearing lots of work being about the work, and I'm sure maybe something for everyone who is here today, Maribel. So thank you. So we are going to, the format, if you haven't been to one of our coffee and conversations, is we will have a conversation and we will kind of have it fishbowl style. And then we will move into a chance for you all to have conversations with each other about what Maribel is sharing in this framework. So we're going to start off with a little conversation right now with a couple of discussion questions. And I was hoping you could orient all of us in your why for the work that you do. So what orients you? What is your why, Maribel?
Yes. So decolonizing is the act of dismantling how settler colonialism has othered Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian people. Settler colonialism is ongoing because dominant culture, policy, and institutions are still participating in genocide and violence. So even though schools welcome, even though we are welcome to participate in the same activities as white folks in order to experience safety, we have to subtract parts of ourselves that are integral to our physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So decolonizing instruction is a shift in mindset because institutions that were designed and uphold settler colonial belief systems would have to close their doors, right? So decolonizing requires a transformation in how you see yourself and others. So I say this because it's not possible to decolonize institutions, but we can decolonize instruction. So when we walk into the classroom as a teacher, we're expected to teach and interact with students the way that teachers have taught and interacted with youth for centuries. And this is part of the status quo. So every protocol, procedure, every which way that we build relationships with youth represents value systems, right? So thinking about decolonizing instruction, I often think about what value systems am I upholding, right? Is it white supremacy or is it settler colonialism? Is it a value system that humanizes all youth, especially Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian youth? And so, sharing all of this for a little bit of context, I'm personally really, really passionate about decolonizing because of my experiences, right? I'm a daughter of Mexican immigrants. I was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. And so, being part of this like interstitial space of being, not quite Mexican, right? Being born and raised in Texas, but also not feeling super part of this like the Hana, right? Identity and experience. I was experiencing Texas for the first time alongside my mother, and really like being when I think about my experience in school, I think about the forced stripping of my culture, right? My language. My father was so scared of being deported that he didn't want his children to speak Spanish, right? So at the same time, my own parents, right, are experiencing this fear. I'm in my community and being bullied for not speaking Spanish, right? So there's this like really interesting experience where, no matter where I was or went, right? And even though I was in homogeneously brown schools, right, I experienced this subtraction of my culture, my language, my dignity, and even my consent, right? And of course, I have good experiences, right? With like, I had good memories of teachers and classmates and so forth. But thinking about, when I left high school completely insecure, like so confused, lost, right? Identity work is not something that was really afforded to me while I was in school. And ever since then, I've been rebuilding, right? I've been rebuilding my spirit ever since. And so I do identify as a reconnecting Indigenous person. And so I do participate in ceremonial practice. I've been privileged enough to be in these like social justice spaces where I got to actually see these brown and black people leading and then inviting me to lead alongside them and feeling so overwhelmed with, you actually see me, like you think that I have something to say or I have something, to offer to this community. And so when I was in community college and being invited to be an activist, to being invited to be a leader, in the migrant justice movement, that really just like completely like changed the trajectory of my life, right? Because I like at that time, because of my insecurities, I was dabbling in alcohol abuse and drug abuse. And so just, giving just this one really kind grown up, right, who just like saw me as a person and wanted me to be a part of what they were passionate about, just like completely changed the trajectory. And so now, 12 years later, is thinking about the work that I do with teachers now and students. I'm really trying to prioritize the work of healing and really that mindset shift, right? Because how we see ourselves and how we see each other is how we are going to create a liberated world. It's how we're going to be able to create these healthy futures for students who are targeted, right, in schools and in our streets. So this is deeply personal, and every day I'm learning. So I also want to say that I'm here not as an expert, right? I'm here as a practitioner, and I'm hopeful to learn with you all as well.
Thank you. Thank you for connecting to the mindset and personal experience work that is so important for all of us to be thinking about. One of the things that really drew me to your work from when I started learning from you, are learning in collaboration with folks around this topic, is the grain size, knowing there's about 100 educators on the line tonight, and we've got specific needs in the classroom tomorrow. So wanted to ask you to take some of these ideas and share some really granular classroom examples. So how do you decolonize grading practices, teacher talk, turn-in talks? But if you could talk us through how you think about those things in the classroom.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. Remember that everything comes with a value system. And part of the way that reinforcing settler colonialism is that we are not transparent about why we are doing things and just expecting students to do them. So it becomes an issue of compliance rather than empowerment. So some examples that I'm happy to share, right, is the grading practices, the teacher talk, turn and talk. So for turn and talk, one of the go-to as a first year teacher, remember, was a think, pair, share, right? So the way that you could decolonize the think, pair, share is you would explain why you utilize this protocol on a regular basis, right? And don't make assumptions that students know why it's important to talk to each other, right? How does this support learning as a process? How does this build community? You could say that talking about the concepts helps retain the knowledge and it helps retain that memory, right? You could ask youth to start the conversation with their partner by checking in with their emotional and spiritual self, because sometimes it's important for youth to release the baggage they're carrying from the day or the week before the work can really be accomplished. And this is the same for adults, right? Whenever we have meetings, right, we set a meeting for ourselves, we usually spend the first 5 or 10 minutes just like checking in, how are you doing, maybe some small talk, and students are exactly the same way. And so if you are prioritizing the value of community building by actively choosing this protocol, then you are really demonstrating to youth that you care about community building. So again, it's really being intentional about how you are explaining this protocol. Um, Another way to decolonize a strategy is to transform the strategy into a discussion tool rather than as a way to collect answers. So typically when this protocol is being delivered in the class, right, it's you have, maybe you're reading a text and you have a guiding question. And so then you have the students reflect and then you turn to their partner and then you collect answers at the end, right? And there's a difference between collecting answers and generating dialogue. So instead of using the think, pair, share to answer one question, it can be used as a scaffolding technique. And so again, it's being transparent. I'm using this tool because reflection is crucial to learning and self-awareness, and being transparent about how these protocols support learning as a process and the ability to understand ourselves is how we can lift up Indigenous values. And remember that when it comes to colonization, the way that that was able to happen was that these settlers just absolutely refused to learn and understand, right, the cultures and traditions and spirituality of the Indigenous people, right? So part of the framework, right, is aligning our protocols that we are using with the values that are really important to you. So if you are a non-native person, right, really thinking about your values in your culture and in your families, right? And then of course interrogating, how is this upholding white supremacy? But really being transparent, right? I care about community building. I care about family. So how do I really uplift this in the protocols I'm using in my classroom, and how do I be transparent, right? So again, it's being intentional. Don't just do a protocol because you have to or because it sounds like, really think about what is it actually accomplishing in my classroom, right? So being a little bit more intentional. With grading systems, right, this is way more systemic. So let me be super clear that we have to completely abolish these archaic grading systems, right? We have to. And it's going to be really hard for families because they like to easily see how their child is doing at school, especially compared to other students, and that is understandable. But there are other ways to show growth and progress in ways that honor learning as a process. Grading systems often show behavior rather than content mastery. It also doesn't encourage cycles of feedback, right? It encourages that one and done. I did my assignment, give me my grade. I don't want to think about this anymore, right? Learning should be iterative and challenging. It should also require feedback, right, from an outside perspective. And so decolonizing the grading systems is about decolonizing data. So what forms of data are accepted in schools right now, right? What forms of data do you collect that are not validated by the school system? How involved are the children and families you serve when it comes to your grading practices? Abigail Echohawk from Seattle, according to her, and she does public health work, decolonizing data means that the community itself is the one determining what is the information they want us to gather. She also says, when we think about data and how it's been gathered, it was never gathered to help or serve us. It was primarily done to show the deficits in our communities, to show where there are gaps. So when you think about decolonizing our grading practices, how can data be collected to show our strengths in the classroom? Right. So the solution here is for our grading practices to be co-created and co-affirmed by the youth and families that we serve. And if you do not have the capabilities to transform or change the grading systems that your district uses, Are you actively being transparent with youth and families about how you are grading? Are you giving back the work in a timely fashion with feedback, right? Are homework assignments weighted heavily, putting Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, BBIA students and poor white students at risk for receiving lower grades? And so these, again, you can decolonize the work by really engaging in what most administrators would consider good teaching, right? And just good practice when it comes to communication with students and communication with families. And of course, like the major challenge when it comes to decolonizing is really time, right? And planning, right? And all of that. So really less is more when it comes to, you know, creating a classroom space that's centered around the values you care about, right? Realistically, does that mean that you're going to be able to accomplish all of the things? Possibly not. But if you're prioritizing, if you're looking at it from like a value base, like I am going to uplift Indigenous values and the protocols and the procedures and even how I'm communicating, because white supremacy and settler colonialism is transmitted in every interaction. It's the same as concept when you're dealing with anti-racism work. It's moment to moment. If you are choosing to be anti-racist, it's literally one decision to the next, right? So as a non-Black person, I am racist unless I'm deliberately not, right? So it's the same with this decolonizing, right? You're really being intentional about the values that are represented in the everyday decisions. And in this case, instructional decisions. If you are not a classroom teacher, but you're an administrator, it's how am I communicating with families? How am I communicating with teachers? How are my meetings set up, right? What are the project management tools that I'm using and how are they upholding settler colonialism? So it's every decision and every like strategy and tool that we're using that we have to interrogate with a decolonial lens.
Thank you. I really appreciate just the variation in your examples and things that might be very much in folks' kind of locus of control immediately to think about tomorrow versus bigger systems thinking that might take some time and collaboration. You started to kind of hint at this a bit, but I'm thinking about the different folks on the line and the different roles they occupy, whether they're classroom teachers, coaches, system leaders, nonprofits, and knowing that some of the kind of common practices that we're thinking about live within the systems that they work in. What suggestions might you have for folks who are trying to apply this intentionality or make changes and they're facing resistance or reluctance from other stakeholders in their learning environments or in their workspaces?
Yeah, so first, thank you, right, for engaging in this work. Thank you on behalf of my children and the 7 generations ahead of us. That resistance or reluctance means that we are doing really good work, and we're challenging and we're encouraging those conversations from happening. And so I know from my perspective, I've experienced resistance to the point where I was punished by this, leveraging institutional measures to try and punish me for the work that I was doing in my classroom. And I cried every day at lunchtime, but I was so committed, right? Because I was centering youth and I was centering myself too, right? And we often forget about ourselves when we're doing this work. So first and foremost, always speak and advocate on behalf of your Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian youth, always. Good instruction will always speak for itself, right? So just focusing on delivering good decolonial anti-racist instruction and the results will speak for itself. Relationship building is at the center of all transformation and movement building. So building rapport, being collaborative, right? Inviting feedback from your stakeholders, from your colleagues, from administration. And of course, reminding yourself that you are making a huge impact in your classroom every single day. You're making a huge impact in the relationships that you have. If a child hears that they matter and experiences it in the way that they're learning, you just change the trajectory of their life for good, period. Be comfortable making decisions to leave your school community too. If there are too many barriers to the work, if you are unable to be your full authentic self and you notice your inner shine is getting dull, be prepared to leave and find a school community that will be affirming, right? That doesn't mean that you have abandoned or neglected that racial justice work and that decolonial work that you are doing. Again, part of this work is really thinking about yourself too, and holding yourself sacred. If students see that you are experiencing bullying and just really painful experiences from your colleagues, administration, or the community, and you're not standing up for yourself, like they're learning from you, right? And so part of indigenizing and decolonizing is really seeing yourself as an example, as a model for that resistance work. The best way to protect yourself, especially as the Black, Brown, Indigenous, or Asian educator, is to document and record conversations that are held by your administration and colleagues. So even sending an email after a verbal in-person conversation with a recap, right, of the conversation is helpful, because as you know and heard about, or maybe experiencing, social justice teachers are often targeted by their school and district and unfairly punished. So, and I say this like to be super real and honest, right? That sometimes that there's nothing that I can say that's going to make it better. But just really reminding you to really honor yourself and to center the work for our children. Like we're really in service of children and families, and really just remembering to do that. If you're looking for research-backed, decolonized, anti-racist curriculum to purchase for your school district or utilize in your classrooms, I suggest looking at ethnic studies curriculums from around the country. So I'm based in Seattle, and so the Washington State Ethnic Studies Now nonprofit tier has curriculum that you can actually purchase, and they have it in every content area, so math, science, social studies, visual arts. And so not only are they providing the diverse text, right, that decenters whiteness, but they're also utilizing these approaches to learning. So you can actually, instead of just, oh, I'm going to have a library, right, with like, awesome BBI authors and the protagonist are people of color and so forth, like that's amazing, but also thinking about pedagogical approaches to learning and how we can even through that we can decenter whiteness and affirm every single child in our classrooms.
Thank you so much. We're going to switch gears now and let folks talk to one another about this work. So I'm going to just set you all up so you know when you get in your breakout groups what it is that we're asking you to do. So we will give you copies, links to these slides, the slide deck, so you can follow along in your breakout groups. On this slide, you see the framework that Maribel authored for decolonizing instruction and some examples. And in just a minute, Maribel, if you want to highlight anything to folks before they go into their groups, but we're going to give you a chance to interact with that in your conversation groups. We'll probably make it slightly shorter than 20 minutes, just for time. We want to have time for the Q&A. So we'll probably make that 15 minutes in breakout groups. And you'll be in groups of probably around 3 or 4, and you'll have a chance to review the framework. And then we'd love you all, give some quick introductions, review the framework, and just identify one instructional strategy where you want to try. And there is a Google Doc, which we'll also share, where you can take notes. If you get stuck, if you feel like you need some input, you can put comments in, and we hope we'll be able to generate a list together of the conversations that you all are having about this work in real time. Maribel, is there anything that you want to talk through around the framework before folks have time to read through in their groups?
Yes. So this framework, it's not prescriptive by any stretch of the imagination. If you follow it with fidelity, however, it will create, right, liberation. And so it's 2 parts to the framework. Part 1 is about developing the understanding of Indigenous people. It can be molded, right? This framework can be molded to fit the teacher who's implementing it for youth in their classrooms. So the first part is about aligning our procedures, instructional decisions, and learning intentions in the classroom to represent Indigenous values such as reciprocity, harmony with the land, and interconnectedness. So what you're doing essentially is explicitly teaching Indigenous values. And for example, interconnectedness, right? Everybody is connected, and not just humans, right? Or Earth. And so how is this interconnectedness represented in our classrooms? So an example of this would be creating space for vulnerability for both teacher and students, inviting families to participate as content experts, right? It's not siloed, essentially. We're all connected. We are all contributing to the learning that's taking place. And then for part two, this is very much inspired. This is project-based learning. You're creating a year-long driving question that will cultivate student-led activism around connecting youth to the original stewards of the land. So again, you're creating this question and centering instruction year-long. So an example of a driving question, how can we connect the learning we're doing in schools to support the efforts of the original caretakers of the land that we are on? And then you would be creating milestones, project launch, partnering with local Indigenous community, that every Indigenous community is currently seeking sovereignty. For example, the Duwamish is seeking federal recognition for their tribe. And so just, really doing students, right, leading that work. So this is the difference between student-centered and student driven, right? Students are driving the learning. They are coming up with the questions. They are driving instruction. So yeah, that's the framework.
Great. So you will be in breakout rooms, introduce yourself. You'll have about 15 minutes. And then when we come back together, we'll have time for Q&A. And I think my colleague Jasmine is going to be able to send us off into our breakouts right now.
Yes, and I just put in the chat the links to both the slides where you can find all the resources and the document that you can all work in together in your breakout room. So now we will go.
Educators on the line who have been so engaged in sharing the examples in the chats and also in the framework document. And just a quick note that I started the recording a little late, so if folks were watching at home, I'm sorry for that awkward transition. Maribel, I know you shared some resources here, so just want to draw folks' attention to those and see if you want to highlight any of those.
Yes, so culturally sustaining pedagogies, teaching and learning for justice in a changing world is like the book that I carry with me like everywhere and just like refer to all the time. And it's like, it's a way also to help me stay inspired. There's so many books that are coming out right now. I'm just such a fan of the nonfiction, like educational, like Lorena Herman just came out with Textured Teaching. Liz Kleinrock just has like these amazing resources. Justice teaching is very much in line with decolonial, anti-racist, and project-based learning. This is a resource. It's a journal article. Decolonizing our practice, indigenizing our teaching is another tool that informs the framework. Also, the work that the University of Arizona Indigenous Teacher Education Program, I'm just such a fan. They also have a framework that they utilize in order to support Indigenous education. It does touch on project-based learning, especially part two. And so rigorous PBL by design is a book that I use in my practice. I've also provided a one-pager that has the framework and explanation and even an example that you've seen on my Instagram on decolonizing choice reading. And so you can find that on my website there using the bit.ly.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We like to leave folks with more to do and read and think about. And just wanted to share for everyone tonight a couple of opportunities that are coming up. Next month, we have another coffee and conversation hosted by Achieve the Core. This is with Dr. Adrian Mims Sr., and it will be focusing on centering the brilliance of Black and Latinx students through research-supported strategies in mathematics. So you are welcome to sign up now. You can follow our Eventbrite information for those details. You can click on the link in the deck. If you are inclined to give us feedback, I promise we pour over it. So there is a survey here where you can just let us know how tonight's learning and conversation and engagement went. So please, 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 you're all teachers, you know how the power of feedback, and we'd love to hear from you about what worked or any suggestions that you have. So that's at that first bit.ly. The second bit.ly is if you want to hear about the events that Achieve the Core that Student Achievement Partners is hosting. If you want to get kind of first access through our emails, you can sign up at that link to be a core advocate and get that information shared with you first right away. And again, you can also follow us through social media. Thank you all so much. Maribel, thank you for making us think and learn and really just learn together in community. It's been a really great hour and probably went very fast for all of us. We will, I'm sure, have lots of great things to think about and talk to colleagues about. So much appreciation. And for the educators who spent the hour with us of your evenings or your afternoons, thank you all so much for being here.
Excuse me, I just have a question since I came in late. Are you going to send out the recording to us, or do we go to a certain website to access it?
Yes, so we'll share the recording with folks who had registered through Eventbrite, and then it'll also be hosted on Achieve the Core. We have coffee and conversations that all the previous coffee and conversations are stored there as well, with the little gap for when I forgot to press record, so apologies.
No problem, but thank you for holding this space and doing this labor of love. Bless y'all.
Thank you.